morning. And as you're about to evidence from the international audience that I have for today's opening talk show, I have to say good afternoon as well as good evening. When they say that the bad actors don't sleep, let me tell you, some of the folks on the panel today, I believe, do not sleep themselves either. We have guests joining us today from not just Canada, but the United States, across Eastern Europe, as well as from Israel. And in future sessions, we have guests from around the world. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to siberXchange 3.0, the Challenge Statement Edition, Day 3. The date today is July 14th, and in keeping with the trend from my previous opening talk shows, I want to reflect on why today is important. Now, there could be many other reasons, but one of the reasons that today holds a particular significance in the history books is because today, I believe in 1798, was when the siege of Bastille had happened and Paris was under a state of alarm. It's quite interesting that on this day we are talking about critical infrastructure, because truly what happens when centers and epicenters of government activity, of infrastructure that's delivering services to the core population and to the wider population as well, what happens when those services are impacted? Now, over the recent past, we've been reading quite a lot about attacks on critical infrastructure. In fact, as many of you know, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity issued a warning in late 2020 that perhaps from a list of what are the top priority targets, critical infrastructure was right up there at spot number 2, and I'd argue probably at spot number 1, issuing a heightened alert for infrastructure providers across Canada to create proactive systems and bolster their cybersecurity frameworks. In fact, as many of you know, the 100-day cyber sprint by the Biden government, all indicating that critical infrastructure is not only becoming a site for bad actors to try and extract revenue, it is also becoming a site for nation-state engagements, and nation-state arguments are playing themselves out across critical infrastructure. So today's discussions are going to be about critical infrastructure, and we're going to be meeting with experts from a variety of vendor providers, a variety of partners that are going to be providing their perspectives through their challenge statements. My job today in the opening talk show is to set the scene for what you are about to experience. My name is Abbas Hirji, and as all of you know, that I am a faculty member at Durham College, leading both the AI Hub and the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. And before I begin, I want to thank the organizers, I want to thank the sponsors of this opening talk, my friends at DarkTrace and my friends at Juniper for making this session happen today. I want to thank our audience for joining us from around the world. But again, as I've said before, an opening would be amiss without acknowledging the fact that this conference is happening on Indigenous land. Even if it's happening virtually, our internet connections, our cables, our 5G network, so on and so forth, all run across Indigenous lands. And I do want to emphasize the importance of this. When we're speaking about critical infrastructure, all of us know very well, and on behalf of the Advisory Board for siberXchange 3.0, I will make the statement that critical infrastructure in northern communities, in remote communities, in Indigenous communities, access to clean water, access to robust broadband networks is more important now than ever before. As an Indigenous elder once said, positivity and improvements in life don't come by chance. They come because of change. Welcome, and let's jump right into it. My first guest, I'm going to take a quick sprint over to the Big Apple, the city where dreams are made of, from New York City. Someone who embodies the idea of showing up. She shows up to every session that she needs to be at, makes time to be on different advisory boards, and is an educator and a cybersecurity practitioner who is well known not just in North America, but I would argue around the world. Sivan, welcome to the opening talk show. In your perspective, why is critical infrastructure such an important subject today, and what are you seeing from an education perspective in what people need to learn about protecting critical infrastructure? Sivan?
Hey everyone, good morning. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm super excited about this challenge specifically. I believe that critical infrastructure environment evolved during the years, and before the session, I was thinking, about myself when I started to work in Israel Railways 4 or 5 years ago. And back then, it was so innovative. I mean, the whole concept of monitoring cyber attacks on trains. We started to build a security operations center for the railways, and that was a process. And for me, it was a new challenge. For example, to monitor specifically the signaling system of the train, and how to do that without causing any damage or safety issues. I feel like, if I'm looking at myself back then, I think there weren't so many security solutions, and it was it was still unclear how you should do things. And recently, I had a chance to speak and work with multiple vendors in the OT industry, and some new startups who came up with innovative solutions for critical infrastructure specifically. And I think that shows the need. Also, all the recent attacks that we've witnessed with the pipeline hack and other and the meat company that were hacked. So it shows that critical infrastructures are vulnerable and are still vulnerable and probably more targeted than before. I was also thinking about the fact that if in the past, when I worked for critical infrastructures, it wasn't that obvious to adopt cloud environments and sometimes cloud-based solutions. And I think that that's something that now almost any company, so many companies embrace the concept of hybrid work and cloud environments. So that's another thing that, if we combine all these different aspects, it makes this challenge more relevant than ever, but also maybe a little bit more complicated than before. On one hand, we have more solutions and more options, but on the other hand, also the other side have new attack vectors and things like that. So that's in a very high level how I see it. I'm curious to hear my colleagues.
Absolutely. And I think, that word that you use, complicated, right? Whenever you try to keep it simple, keeping it simple is extremely complicated. But I think you've emphasized a really important point here when you mentioned that in your own engagements as a security practitioner, as an educator, you started to engage more and more with the partner community. And I like to refer to the vendor community as a partner community, having been part of that myself. And there's a lot of learning that can happen there. So from New York City, I'm going to come back to my hometown of Ontario, somewhere picturesque in rural Ontario, where my captain, David Masson, is awaiting to provide some comments. David, you were a superstar yesterday, lots of sessions, lots of positive engagement. And today you have a session with two pretty phenomenal names and heavyweights in the cybersecurity space in Ontario, Kelly Irvin and Mark Dillon, both of whom I consider mentors to myself. David, are you finding that more and more security leaders are looking to have a conversation, especially with you, around the capabilities within DarkTrace, especially from an AI perspective, and how that can be translated when it comes to OT operations and critical infrastructure? David?
Yeah, absolutely. In the way that Sivan just pointed out, and you yourself said, attacks on critical national infrastructure are very, 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 very important for all societies here on the planet. Attacks on critical national infrastructure aren't new. They've been going on since mankind actually began. The difference now is, thanks to cyber and the way we're all interconnected, they're actually easier to effect. Have all governments paid attention to this? Well, basically some have, some haven't. Obviously down in the States, you're seeing a sudden massive pivot to trying to protect critical national infrastructure, and fingers crossed that all works out. Up here in Canada, our government's been warning about this for quite a few years. Whether the public's noticed that or not, but they have actually been saying it. So these are very, very important systems, and the threat from cyber to them is absolutely real. For us, believe it or not, DarkTrace actually began in the OT space way back in 2012, 2013. That's where we actually started. We often talk about how our technology is used passively on networks. It's not inline, it doesn't touch it. It's for that very reason, because as you all know, you don't want to touch an OT network because they're so fragile. You just shout boo at them and the PLCs fall over and that's the end of it. So we actually began this. So we've been in protecting OT with AI pretty much for the last 7, 8 years. Because if you want to cause some real damage, and it doesn't matter whether you're a nation state attacker or a criminal gang or whatever, if you want to cause some real damage, attack the critical national infrastructure of a country using a cyber attack.
And I think, you mentioned that really well yesterday when talking about government services and the domino effect when one service goes down. And I also think for our audience that's paying attention to this, the uniqueness that you get from the DarkTrace stack, AI is not something that started recently. It's been around for a very, very long time. But since, when David mentions, the 2012, 2013, the evolution that DarkTrace has gone through, I do recommend for those of you who have an interest in applying automation, applying AI, machine learning, neural nets to your cybersecurity frameworks, I highly recommend taking some time, connecting with folks like David, but also going onto the DarkTrace website and getting some of those white papers. Extremely useful for all of us. I'm going to come to Juniper very shortly and my friend Mike, but before I do that, I'm gonna board one of your private jets and head off to picturesque Kazakhstan, because my dear friend Saltanat, who I want to give you a shout out because I've seen you in advisory board meetings when it's 4 a.m. in the morning your time. And I think that, again, just like with Sivan and even Daniel, who I'll come to very shortly, embodies this idea of the power of showing up. Always continue your learning, and the L will eventually fall silent, but you have to keep your learning going. And I see a lot of that in you, Saltanat. Saltanat, sitting in the perspective that you have, we've been talking a lot from a North American perspective. Within your area of work, are you also seeing critical infrastructure becoming an increasing target? And what's the landscape like in your environment? How has your life changed also as a result of the pandemic and the kind of threats that you're seeing? Saltanat?
Hi, Ali. Thank you for a great introduction. And then right now, let me focus where I'm working right now. I'm working onshore in oil and gas industry. It's specifically, it's a Chevron project. And I would say in Kazakhstan, it's digitally transforming oil and gas industry. I mean, they're implementing, I would say, innovations such as remote access, such as integrating IT with OT in order to manage assets like KPI reporting, production scheduling, and so on. And then, of course, they're seeing this, this is coming with cybersecurity risks. I mean, this innovation is good for the company, but with that, new cybersecurity risks are coming. So basically what I'm doing right now, that I have to make sure that all this digital transformation is built with security in mind before it goes to the production. So when I work onshore, what I'm saying that compare with enterprise IT, like in order to perform one task, when in enterprise IT, I could spend 1 hour, but in critical infrastructure, I will spend 1 week. I have to do risk assessment first, and then I have to think 3 times before implementing that. Because I know if I do something wrong, I could damage my country's, environment. So since cybersecurity risks are increasing, companies are more paying attention for risk assessment, network and vulnerability assessment, and hardening before it goes to the production. So basically, we're baking in design phase and bolting in after that.
And I couldn't agree with you more that, the term that you use, digital transformation, and I really, to David and Mike, who are going to be responding to challenge statements, my 2 rupees of thought is really to focus on that aspect of digital transformation, the pace of it. I heard a saying which really resonates, which is, we've gone weeks and weeks without any innovation. Suddenly, thanks to the pandemic, you see a decade of innovation within a week. The pace, the need to move things very quickly, And the need for us as security practitioners to move that quick has really made it for a very challenging landscape. So Saltanat, as always, thank you for your perspective. And I'm now going to fly back, a busy day on the road for me, or in the skies for me, and I'm going to go back to the United States. And, I mentioned at the beginning, I referenced the Biden administration's emphasis on critical infrastructure now. I think it's called the 100-day sprint, if a cybersecurity sprint, if I'm not mistaken. Mike, Juniper is a household name. During my early days at Orion, I remember, from a networking perspective, working with all of your equipment and the amazing folks at Juniper. It's not without reason that I would say 25 of the top Fortune 500 companies utilize your services. Can you tell us a little bit about what are you, when you look at the challenge, you're going to be looking at critical infrastructure planning, you're going to be looking at how do you protect critical infrastructure. What are the tool stacks that you're going to be presenting during your challenge statement? Can you give our audience a brief introduction to what all you have going for you in the world of cybersecurity? Mike?
Excellent question, Ali, and thank you for having me. Certainly, this is a topic that, as my fellow panelists mentioned, is incredibly important for all sectors, all geos. Right? This is not a country-based challenge that we face. It is indeed a global issue, and one that we stand to better benefit from if we share these practices and recognize that no single vendor is the answer. The partnership mentioned earlier is actually where I'll spend a moment, because that's where the stacks and our capabilities play. It's that through the integration of open standards, through well-documented APIs, and through collaboration within the community, that we build the best possible solutions and recognize that at the end of the day, the operations teams that are responsible for managing these technologies that ultimately protect these assets, right? Be they PLCs or whatever element out in the distributed infrastructure, that it's going to be via some shared mechanic, and that at the end of it, we need to be effective at assisting with the mitigation of risk. And I use that statement carefully because in the industrial world versus the enterprise organization world, the concept of observability and ensuring that you do no harm is more crucial than ever, because you cannot impact a system, you cannot take a monitoring control offline just because you see an anomaly. The fact is that you need to know exactly what's transpiring at any given point, and that knowledge comes from the leverage of technologies across the entire network. And connected security is our strategy to leverage all of the environment, not just single controls, but integrations with partners, as well as the routed switching and infrastructure upon which all the packets ride, coupled with our own security capabilities that are both cloud-based as well as runs within virtual and physical appliances, is how we sort of approach this challenge. And indeed, there are certainly partnerships that we rely on, but also work extensively throughout the community in all geographies with partners to address the nation's and industrial systems that are really being preyed upon by the actors to monetize every day. So I think, yeah.
No, I think very well put. And more importantly, even for our audience, what I will say is that I highly recommend that you pay attention to their products like Mist AI, for example. But even if you go onto the Juniper website, you'll see a lot of their solutions. And this is something that I was talking quite a bit to a couple of my other advisory members, including Mohsen Azari, Kush Sharma, a couple of other folks. In fact, tomorrow I have a session with the Privacy Commissioner of Alberta. And one of the things was on protection at the edge and understanding networking equipment. Because at the end of the day, for a malicious act, in most cases, 9 times out of 10, for it to be perpetrated, it does have to traverse a network of sorts. Understanding what Juniper can do for you at the edge and at various segments of your network will be particularly interesting. So I'm looking forward to this, Mike, and a couple of questions that have come in, which I'll weave into our future conversation. So stay tuned and all the best in your challenges. And from the US, once again, I will board a flight to picturesque Tel Aviv to meet my dear friend, Daniel. Now, this individual I have never met in person before, but I'll tell you one thing about him. Puts me to shame. Somehow or the other, he finds each day to have 26 hours a day. You email him and he will respond almost right away. 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 4 p.m., or 5 p.m. Daniel, firstly, I want to thank you for yesterday's session. I had a lot of my team members watching it as well when you broke down the security breach that we were simulated within a power utility facility. From your perspective, Daniel, when you look at critical infrastructure, could you give our audience a little bit of a sense of how do you get started with even beginning to understand where your security vulnerabilities lie? What are the first few baby steps that you would recommend? Daniel? And it had to happen. Somebody had to go on mute, and that was Daniel. And I will say this, Daniel, you're the first in siberXchange 3.0, so that award goes to you.
Perfect. So first of all, Ali, I would like to make a slight correction because we are talking about critical infrastructure, but in reality today, everything is critical infrastructure. If you ask people in Israel, the cellular communication is more critical than water and electricity. So today everything is critical, and on the other hand, the ISA community is now arguing about if they should call it ICS or IACS or OT and how to call it. So I do believe that this discussion is rather focusing on what we call cyber physical. Cyber physical is representing all the 10 to 12 leading applications. So when we are talking about cyber physical and the risk, how we are looking at it. So I know that many people say, how we protect the infrastructure, we say CIA for IT. And I politely tell people, not CIA, not AIC, not IAC, but loudly and simple say SRP. Why SRP? Because safety must always be on the top of the priority for everyone. And I'm sure Saltanat is dreaming about safety 24 hours a day, because this is what is happening in the old field. So safety, reliability, and productivity. So when you ask me how to deal with cyber physical systems, I'm in this area not long time ago. Among the 45 years of industrial activity, about 30 years I'm dealing with industrial control systems, and last 10 years with cyber security. I would like to say people that actually we started to worry about cyber physical system, about the cyber security in 2010. Not because there was no incident before. We know the Marushi water and everything. But in 2010, obviously the Stuxnet event, the stubborn people in the industrial facility had no choice but to admit that the air gap systems are not safe. Until then, until 2010, they said, we are disconnected from the internet, we are okay, we sleep well. 2010 was an internally generated cyber attack, and this changed the entire way how we are looking at cyber physical systems, and we put safety on the top of our priority. So when we are looking about industrial facilities, we are looking about the control, the assurance, and so on. I would like to say a few more words about where are we going. You already mentioned the AI and the ML, which is going to take a part in industrial cyber physical systems due to Industry 4 transition and so on. So on one hand, we are going to see improved processes. On the other hand, we are going to increase the cyber attack surface. And those people who are running to the AI, running to IoT, running to ML, I says, take a step back, think about it, about the cyber attack surface. And this is what makes me worried most of the day, how we are compensating and protecting our cyber physical systems. I hope it somehow referred to your challenging questions.
Daniel, I'm going to say this again, the team at siberX, somebody give this man a show, because, you know, the words of wisdom that you draw, I can't believe you're dropping this stuff for free. This is extremely important stuff, and I really appreciate your perspective. And I think, you know what, you're right. You know, people are dreaming about safety and security, and I'm sure Saltanat and the likes are thinking about that. And as they say, dreams don't put you to sleep, they keep you awake. So now I know the reason why both of you are awake quite a bit. Anyways, I'll come back to Sivan now. Sivan, there's a question that's come in, and this has to do with the fact that the audience that's watching today's session, they're watching the challenge statements, these are not individuals that are entirely in the tech side of security. Some of them are on the people side, on the process side. From an educational standpoint, what do you think a lot of these critical infrastructure providers can provide their end users with? Is there more from an education side that utility providers can provide to local people living in their municipal areas? What do we need to do from an education standpoint in your perspective, Sivan?
Thanks, Heli. I think it's an interesting question. I feel like, I mean, what I'm trying to do with my students is basically to expose them to as many vendors and solutions in the industry. I think that we sometimes tend to teach more or to focus more on the theoretical side and all the, I mean, and we do understand the challenge, but having a hands-on experience is key. And when I see some of my students starting their first job, some of them in critical infrastructures, I think that provide them with the option and expose them to as many solutions in the field, that's something that can help them understand better the challenge and how to deal with that. There is also something that I think, I mean, it's relevant not only for OT systems and the critical infrastructure, but visibility is key. And the first thing we need to do is to kind of map our assets and systems and have better clarity on what we should focus and what we should protect and how we can stay in control in order to make sure that we have the right solutions in place and that we're not missing anything. And I know that that's something that sometimes can be challenging. When I implemented a SIM solution for one of the companies I worked in, and it was challenging to collect logs from controllers, for example, to understand better the situation there. And there are many things that I had to figure out along the way, but I feel that if we have the option to provide this hands-on experience and exposure to people who are new to the field or to our students, for those who have students here, I think that's something that can help them a lot and also help companies to kind of train their employees, even if they're not at the end of the day using one solution. It's always good to understand the market and what kind of other options you have, because that's such a dynamic world. I mean, you can use a solution that it's good for you now, but in few months or a year from now, you know, some people will call it a legacy. So I think that it's always important to keep up with what's going on in the market, the new trends, the new capabilities and solutions, and if there is an option to also use your hands to kind of test it, that's the best approach.
Yeah, I think hands-on experience is extremely important, but and this is where, you know, folks like the folks at DarkTrace as well as at Juniper come in very strong. I'll go to David and then come back to Mike and then go to Saltanat and Daniel. David, let's start off with you. I mean, yesterday, you know, I mentioned the fact that, and you know what, even Mark Dillon talks a lot about, you know, DarkTrace's work at City of Sudbury, for example, and other municipal spaces. You've had a huge role, not just in helping from an OT perspective, but also when it comes to crisis communications, when it comes to outreach, so on and so forth. So I really do commend the work that you've done in that space. Let's look at a bit of a technical question here. And I'm going to rephrase this because this came to me from a direct message, and to the audience member that asked this, thank you. With your permission, I don't know how I'm going to receive that permission, but assuming I have your permission, I'm going to rephrase the question and ask this to David. David, when you take, for example, the recent attack at the Florida water supply, one of the things that happened at the Florida water supply was that it was an HMI interface that was, for lack of a better word, that was compromised. When that HMI interface was compromised, it was compromised through remote access, where TeamViewer, in that case, was brought into question. How do you, when you look at these devices, or when you look at access management from an AI perspective, how easy is it in that case where somebody's password and username was compromised? How easy is it in that case from an AI perspective to detect something like that? And how quickly could you?
Thanks very much to whoever it was that posed the question. There's 2 points actually here. One actually is the remote access, and Daniel brought this up when he was speaking earlier on. Traditionally, people have always thought that OT systems were on their own and isolated, and there's a perfect example of how they're not actually on their own and isolated anymore. And it's quite possible, particularly because of the digital transformation and working from home, for lots of people to remotely access OT systems from pretty much anywhere in the world. And that's clearly what happened in the Florida case. Looking at it from the DarkTrace point of view, the way we're using the AI is about modeling patterns of life, understanding what is normal for an infrastructure, in this case, an OT infrastructure. And in the case of the HMI, what we would have seen there would be a departure from the HMI's pattern of life, a departure from how that product, the remote access product, was used, and probably a departure of life for the person who was actually running the controls at the time. They were doing something they'd never done before in a way they'd never done before, at a time they'd never done before. And that's how the AI would have flagged that as an alert and said, hey, something's changed here, because that's what it's about. It's about finding change to normality, giving it a score, and really pointed out to folks, say, hey, you know what, you better have a look at this now, because as I said yesterday, the idea of using AI here as a cybersecurity product is you don't get hacked in the first place.
Oh, and I think, when you just work with that just a little bit, there are a couple of other questions that emerge from there. In fact, I have seen one question also come into me directly around the ethical concerns around monitoring. So we'll come to that very shortly, David. But as always, forewarned is forearmed, and that approach from DarkTrace has been extremely well received at siberXchange 3.0. So I recommend you keep that parlance going in your challenge statement today with Mark Dillon and Kelly Irvin. I'm going to go back to Mike, and Mike, and again, rewording a question, and actually this question, I believe, was from yesterday, but I'll reword it just a little because it applies here quite a bit. From your perspective, when you are applying your Juniper stack and when you are supporting different critical infrastructure providers, one of the areas that you have to be particularly watchful of is when it comes to actually acting upon a particular threat or acting upon a particular situation, keeping the user experience in mind and making sure that if a recommendation is being made to shut something down, it has catastrophic effects. If you bring down the energy facility, for example, your fridge doesn't work and then the food doesn't cool down, so on and so forth. How do you go about managing those alerts, and how do you go about acting upon that? What kind of dashboarding and visualizations has Juniper created in order to allow for people to make not just decisions, but informed, evidence-backed decisions?
That's a really great question. And I think it's the sort of root of many cyber challenges that organizations face, right? I think over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of advances around visibility and ultimately verdict accuracy. Because what it comes down to is to be able to infer from the indicators from the activity what's going on, and to ultimately determine whether it is or is not a malicious event. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, right, knowing exactly what's transpiring is key. And so to support that, right, we capture a lot of telemetry. We leverage, the environment itself, both on the network and on the app stack side, right, the security side from L4 to 7. And from that, we basically build a composite image of the applications, the behavior, and what devices are where. And so being able to fingerprint the elements in the environment assists with that ever-present challenge of your inventory, your assets. Because as as mentioned earlier by Saltanat, right, the documentation motion, that side of this process, cannot be overlooked. And so helping that team stay on top of what is deployed, where it is located, the topology, and knowing how it's to behave, you can use the rest of the intelligence stack, right, the cloud and the logic to better ascertain whether an activity is or is not malicious and anomalous in the world of industrial controls is not something that you would act upon to sever or to mitigate. And then even frankly, in the case where there are malicious activities, I may advise that an organization permits that because frankly, the cleanup and so forth is simpler than the restart of systems that, should the monitor connection or the control connections be severed, takes days or weeks, right? And you touched on one thing, and I'll just leave it here regarding the scope of this, right? As folks may be aware, right, we had a little weather event here in Texas earlier this year, and it was not cyber related, but the impact was enormous, right? The fact is that the electrical grid was overloaded, and frankly, a lot of homes lost power. 4.5 million, I think, were offline for a day and a half, and so that's sort of the scale and the potential economic impact that we're talking about in the context of critical infrastructure should a system be taken offline. Because in that instance, the restart was potentially weeks. And so they made a choice to shut things down so that it didn't blow certain control elements. And as a result, it blacked out a great deal of the state, and a large number of residents were affected by this. The same outcome could happen if you make too rash a decision and too aggressive an action on something that's potential. So that's ultimately what the logic and the software and the analytics and AI are built to help ops teams with.
Very comprehensively put together, and I will echo this sentiment also when thinking about the advisory board and we were discussing the topics with Juniper. I mean, you really emphasize on this point is that the attack will happen, but you're not just being judged on whether you can prevent the attack alone, but also how you respond and how you recover, which goes to a lot of disaster recovery plans, BCP planning, so on and so forth. So as always, Juniper, very comprehensive in your approach. And from personal experience, I can say that the ability to actually bring security and these discussions, not just to the tech folks, but bring it to the financial folks, the admin folks, to the folks facing the end users, and make it in and translating that knowledge in different ways. The skill that I think Juniper has mastered in many ways, and it reflects in your user base. So I'm really looking forward to seeing your challenge statements. You're going to be talking about critical infrastructure plans. You're going to be talking about how to prevent attacks at the edge. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, from Kate, so on and so forth. So again, thank you for your very comprehensive answer. We've got about 15 to 16 minutes left. I want to go to Saltanat and then Daniel. Saltanat, this was a question that was kind of yesterday during our early session was brought up, but I didn't have an opportunity to raise it. But once in a while, my memory works, and I remembered it just now, so I figured I'll make it a part of this discussion here. From a cost perspective, when the different companies, DarkTrace and Juniper, are responding to their challenge statements and guiding folks with what they need to do, there's a budget that goes with that. Is it fair to assume, or perhaps let's have your perspective, is smaller communities or communities where they don't have that kind of budget, is it fair to assume that they may be at a little bit of a disadvantage in terms of using the variety of tools that are out there to protect their critical services? Or are there other ways in which you are guiding your clients? Saltanat, your perspective.
Thank you, Alice, for a great question. Yeah, we talk a lot about this. I usually, as I said, I work onshore, so I interact with engineers a lot. And what they say always, buy this cybersecurity product and we are 100% secure. So yeah, we're not 100% secure. What I would say usually, we have to first identify our critical assets. Then we have to make sure that we apply defense in-depth strategy. Then it comes like, let's say, okay, where attack point entry is, let's say, then we have to buy firewall, for example, to the first line of defense. And then secondly, then we go, if attacker, let's say, gains entry to our network and critical infrastructure, what is his next step? Do we have barrier? Again, for this line of defense, we need to have some security products as well. So then at the end, what is attacker is targeting? So how we harden this? Do we need to apply endpoint, protection control? It's also the product. So what I would like to say that it all depends from how you're going to design your network, But the first thing that you have to do is you have to inventory of all assets that I'm repeating again. And then we need to have configuration management, vulnerability monitoring, and event log management. And then build on top of the security controls.
Absolutely, and I think you're spot on when you mention this, right? Is that it's not always a financial. It's never really just a financial situation. Throw money at it, and the security problem disappears. There's always you're never eliminating that risk. You're only reducing that level of risk. So well said as always, Saltanat. Speaking of specialization in this sector, and Daniel, I'll bring you into the conversation here because I. Tongue in cheek, I said someone should give this man a show. But the reality is that you are going to be conducting some training sessions very soon alongside with the siberX team. Daniel, when you look at from a training and a certification perspective, and you look at the security practitioners within what you termed as physical cyber spaces, what are some of those skills that you're starting to train them on? What are some of those areas of interest that you're beginning to sharpen their skill sets based on your expertise? Daniel?
Thank you, Ali. I think it's when I'm conducting my training, and Sivan already had the opportunity because I conducted at 2 o'clock in the morning a session to her students. I like to focus on the main things. So what is important is not only how to configure the firewall. What is important to understand the principles. Once we understand the principles, then everything will be easier. I would like to remind all of us the story that David mentioned, the Oldsmar, Florida case. What really happened there? What really happened there, that the physical parameter was increased from 100 to 11,000. Was it a cybersecurity event? Absolutely not. And not too many people are writing about it. It was a mistake in the design of the industrial operation, because if I have a parameter which should be 100, maybe I can allow to make it 120 or 150 or maybe 200, depending on what is required, but never 11,000. And this is what we call secured by design. Secured by design, we must be implemented on every industrial control system long before cybersecurity is even considered. The second topic I would like to say is that the two painful topics that we are facing. One is that asset inventory. People don't know what they have installed. They have no idea, controllers, software. They have no idea which device is communicating with another device. I don't know, Saltanat, if you ever checked why that PLC, which has nothing to say to another PLC, why suddenly they are communicating each to other? It's the mistake. It was an incorrect design. The next topic that I would like to say is a major principle. I always start with physical security. And this is easy. I can make a tour and I can see. Physical security is strong precondition to cyber security. You cannot talk about cyber if you didn't assure physical security. Second, you cannot talk about safety if you did not assure cyber security. And the event in Saudi Arabia, okay, when people disabled the safety instrument system is a great example that cyber security allowed to create a safety risk. So these are the topics. When I'm talking to the students, I just conducted a 16-hour session in Hong Kong, and in Singapore this week I'm conducting the session, and I'm talking about principles, and I'm talking about the important things 3 times. Make sure that all students will understand what is really important. Once I achieve this goal, then we can talk about the technology solutions, we can talk about policies, training, but first of all, understanding the principle of cyber physical system protection.
I'm sure everybody right now that's listening, including the panelists, are all agreeing with me that we're voting you president of the world. Not only do you answer the question, you give us experiences and examples from around the world. Daniel, thank you for that. And to the audience, I will let you know that very soon it's come to my attention that Daniel will be launching a course with the team at siberX. And Daniel, I will be looking forward to doing a power hour with you, because there's a lot in that course that we will unpack. And rest assured that I'm signing up. So thank you as always, Daniel. We have about 7 to 8 more minutes, and I want to go to Mike, and then I'll go to David, and then we'll have some closing comments, and then we'll wrap up, as I know you folks also have to prepare for your challenge statement edition. Mike, from your perspective now, you've spoken a lot about, the edge, you've looked at SD-WAN topology, so on and so forth, and changing the way in which networking is happening, monitoring, visualization, dashboarding, so on and so forth. When you look at some of the barriers that folks might have to adopting some of the cybersecurity strategies that you're recommending, especially in physical infrastructure, what are some of those barriers of entry? What's preventing some of them from adopting some of the approaches that you're bringing forward? And how do you seek to loosen up some of those barriers? Mike?
That's a brilliant question. I think, the root of that is what we've all faced for the last, 20 to 25 years. I think, first and foremost, the, principal barrier is recognizing that, we all have a shared interest in, mitigating or managing the risk. And that, it all starts with great, communication, understanding, the objectives from each team, and ultimately, finding a path to make the right technology selections and the right process improvements. And I think, as Daniel just noted, right, there's, a lot of elements that go beyond just cyber alone, and that we have a shared interest. So I think the teams on the operational sensitivity, the safety interests, are absolutely, critical stakeholders for the cyber or the technologists to engage with, to build the best possible protections, and to do so in the most automated, fashion possible. Because the less human, dependence, the faster, the solution can address challenges or anomalies, issues. The better off the ops team is to make a choice and to take the appropriate action and response. But it all starts with, to me, the communication, the people side of this that ultimately then drives the process. That's where I think the gates and the challenges lie for most organizations, right? They don't know how to get to that next step, and there are paths.
Mike, very well canvassed. Since day one, especially on the siberXchange platform, we've been talking a lot about people, process, and technology, and I really appreciate the fact that you seem to be taking a people-oriented approach as well. Mike, lots of more questions, but I know that these will all come up in your challenge statement, so all the very best. Those books behind you, the quality of your responses are indicative. You've read all of those books. So, Mike, quite awesome to have you. I'm going to go to David. And David, this is probably the last question I'll get to ask you at siberXchange, but definitely not the last set of questions I'm ever going to ask you, and I hope to see you at more sessions. David, this was a question that came up perhaps even during our discussions in my own faculty at Durham College when we were talking about adopting some solutions or testing some solutions. From an infrastructure perspective, given the heavy load that AI technologies can take from a data perspective, from a hosting perspective, so on and so forth, what infrastructure is required in order to adopt a DarkTrace solution?
To adopt a DarkTrace solution, basically all we need is a place where we can get your network traffic onto the AI for analysis. And in OT networks, it usually spans or taps somewhere. It can be the same in on-prem for IT. And given the fact I've just mentioned both of those together, I just want to echo something that Daniel mentioned earlier on when he said that everything is critical. We really shouldn't be looking at these OT networks as being in isolation anymore. They're connected to IT networks. IT networks are connected to the OT networks. There's IT all over the OT. There's even OT somewhere inside the IT. And I'd be advocating that when you're doing that architecture and bringing the AI in, you want to take a unified view of your whole digital infrastructure, not just your OT, not just your IT. And deploy a technology. Obviously, I'm advocating for using AI to do it. That actually covers the whole thing, the absolute whole thing. Because if you do that, you'll not end up with your usual. What usually happens is siloed products that don't communicate with each other. You've got the one technology doing the whole thing. Because as we've seen in quite a few of these attacks that have landed in OT, they've often arrived in IT, then pivoted over to OT at some point. Seen them go the other way as well. So a unified view. And why do you want to take a unified view to security? Because the attackers usually take a unified view when they attack you.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to that session on called Trust But Verify. And bringing in other areas of security and monitoring, so on and so forth, is going to be very interesting. I also think, these elements that Daniel mentioned and Sivan alluded to as well as Saltanat on the physical security piece also that contributes to digital security elements. looking at those parallels is going to be very, very interesting. So, Captain David, I know you've been on a couple of sessions yesterday. I wish you all the very best. We have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to get concluding remarks from all three of our advisors. And since I started with Sivan and then went to Saltanat and then to Daniel, for the closing, I'm going to start with Daniel. So, Daniel, you have about a minute. And after hearing both David and Mike and understanding the siberXchange conference and this new version of the conference, which we've called Revolutionary, which is the Challenge Statement Edition. What about this conference and this format has particularly excited you? Because you've been very, very engaged. Your perspective, Daniel?
I'm very glad that this conference is covering a broad range of cybersecurity topics, talking separately about IT, talking separately about industrial, talking about how these two entities are meeting, because definitely we see that IT and OT is coming together. And I do believe that educating employees involved in cybersecurity is the should be on the top priority. And I'm glad to be involved that majority of my activities, education, teaching people, making them knowledgeable to increase the cybersecurity posture.
Education is a powerful weapon with which we can change the world. So Daniel, as always, very nicely said. Saltanat, from your perspective, you've heard both DarkTrace and Juniper go deep into how their solutions are going to be deployed or how they think about different challenges. What about this conference, and after hearing DarkTrace and Juniper speak, what particularly excites you about being at siberXchange 3.0?
Thank you, Ali. Yeah, this format of this conference is really different. And I mean, usually the conferences is like, you buy this product and you are 100% secure. But this conference is bringing up how we can deal with challenges. We can see from recent cyber attacks that our critical infrastructure is vulnerable, and then I would like to listen more how David and Mike, could help us to mitigate to our risks to our acceptable level. This is what I would like to hear more.
Absolutely. And what I also enjoy is, the global perspective that's been brought out. And, we've taken a lot of local talent and gone global. We've globalized. And I think that just from a conference perspective is very neat and really uses remote and virtual conferences effectively. So Saltanat, as always, it's a pleasure. And the last words will go to Sivan. Now, Sivan, you've been a proponent for diversity, for education, for security critical infrastructure. You're involved with leading cyber ladies. You're involved in a lot of initiatives, but you still made time to take on this conference in its basically in a very revolutionary and a very radical kind of approach in its first phase. You still made the time. Why was this conference so important for you, Sivan?
Well, I really believe that critical infrastructure, I think Daniel described it in the best way. It's everyone's problem. It's our day-to-day. We all expose and use critical infrastructure somehow. And even if we're working in a specific niche or in a specific field, I think we do need to have an understanding on what the challenges are with critical infrastructures. And I also think that I really believe in that, and that's why we're implementing and we are having a critical infrastructure section for my students. I think OT, it's something that everyone needs to understand. If in the past it was only a problem for specific companies, I believe it's a very important topic, and we all need to understand it. And I guess that's why it was important to me to be here. And also, it's always a pleasure to be on the same panel with these amazing colleagues here. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And I'll say this on behalf of our advisory board. I want to thank DarkTrace and Juniper for supporting this conference. And for us as advisors, sitting on myself at Durham College, it's great exposure for us. It's a great way for us to see your tech stack, to learn more, to ask questions. And that's been the key here. We've been able to ask questions in a safe space, and I well and truly appreciate that. So with that, first I'm going to thank everybody that was on this session. David, Daniel, Saltanat, Mike, Sivan, thank you so very much for all of your commentary today. I'm going to ask you to stay on just for 30 seconds more so we can have a quick goodbye and debrief in the green room. But to our audience, you know, one of the reasons I really enjoyed this session is we didn't just have advisors. We had expert speakers from two companies that are providing phenomenal services in the network. And they were able to engage in such a healthy conversation. For me, that's why I don't look at the vendor community as just vendors, because they're not just selling and telling me, they're partners. And today, one of the things that, you know, both of these are successful companies, but one of the things that I learned is that the secret to success is that there are no secrets. So David and Mike, thank you for speaking openly and engaging in such a profound and cordial manner. If there are two things that I also learned for your challenge statements is keep it comprehensive, keep it collaborative, and that's the best way to compete in this space. Thank you all, and to our audience, I believe in the next half an hour, the first challenge statement, or rather the first keynote statement will begin, and that will be conducted by Juniper. Also, please make sure that you're engaging on the live chat, visit the wall to buy any merchandise, and interact with members, sign up on their groups. I know that there are some prizes and giveaways. I will see you later on in the day in a couple of other sessions. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy day 3 of CyberXchange 3.0.